Okay, well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this evening's South Georgia Association event. My name is Martin Collins, and I'm going to be sort of Zoom host for you this evening. Pat Lurcock is sat virtually next to me, and Pat is looking after all the IT, so hopefully we'll make sure things run smoothly. This evening, before I introduce our guest speaker this evening, I'm just going to invite our chairman, David Drury, to say a few words. So, David, I will pass the floor across to you if you're ready to go.
Thanks very much, Martin. So, welcome everybody to this next in our series of South Georgia Association webinars. Martin's hosting tonight's talk, and he's going to inform you about our next webinar at the end of the evening. But before I hand over him to play Master of Ceremonies, I've got just two very short announcements. First is to record the very recent and extremely sad loss of two members of our association's committee. Bob Burton, a giant in the environmental and conservation field of South Georgia, and John Owen, our valued and indefatigable treasurer. Both of them are going to be hugely missed by the association. Now, my second announcement is that we are going to be holding a spring event on the 6th of May this year. And it'll be the first opportunity for us all to meet together in 2 years. Now, I'm going to share my screen with you. At least I'm trying to share my screen with you. It's being a bit slow, I'm afraid. Oh dear, it's not, here we go.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got to mute.
Okay, so here we are. Takes a little bit of time to get the ship up the Thames. So on the 6th of May, we are going to hold a spring event on the HQS Wellington, moored on the embankment of the River Thames in London. We are going to start the event at 4:30 in the afternoon with drinks, followed by a grand barbecue. And we will have the run of this delightful ship from the afternoon all the way through into the evening. And we hope it'll be a really fantastic occasion for us to meet together. Now, the event is going to be open to all the members of the association in the first instance. We're going to give priority to our members. And so I would ask you to look out for emails that will give you the information about making a booking. But after that, we are going to open it up for people who are really interested in South Georgia. But if you want to have your priority booking, then what I suggest is that you become a member of the South Georgia Association and be able to join with us to share our passions for this fantastic island, meet with other people who share and have explored and worked in this area, and have a fantastic evening, and to enjoy the other activities that the association offers. So go onto our website, join as a member, or maybe if you are wanting to get inside, maybe get a member who's already there to sponsor you, and maybe even bring you as a guest to the London event in the spring. That's really, I think, all I want to say at this point. So I'm now going to hand you back over to Martin. I'm really looking forward to this talk that's coming up. Thanks, everybody.
Great, thank you very much, David. And before we get going, just a couple of sort of housekeeping notices for everybody. First of all, please keep your microphones muted. We can mute them for you on your behalf, but it's better if you try and do that yourselves. It's also probably a little bit better when we get into John's talk, if you just turn your video off as well, if you know how to do that. It just makes sure we don't get any problems with the bandwidth for anybody doing it that way. So I'd appreciate it if you can mute and turn off your videos during the talk. I will introduce John in a second and invite him to give his talk. And at the end, I will give everybody opportunities to ask questions. But perhaps if you do have questions, you could pop them in the chat and I can then pick from those questions and put them to John. We've got 358 of you online at the moment, so an excellent audience this evening for the talk by John. Okay, well, anyway, this evening's talk is from John Alexander. Now, John is going to talk about whaling on South Georgia. And John was an electrician with Christian Salversons. He first went to Leith Harbour in September 1954 and overwintered. He returned in September 56 and overwintered again. And he then spent 2 seasons down south, 58-59 on the Southern Harvester and 59-60 on the Southern Venturer. His last season was then back in Leith Harbour from September 1960 to 61 as an ASDIC electrician. And then much later, John returned to South Georgia in 2009 on Skip Novak's Pelagic Australis. Welcome, John. I'm really looking forward to hearing about this, and I'm sure everybody else is. So I will ask you to share your screen and tell us about whaling in South Georgia.
Thank you very much. Share. Right. Well, just before I do start my talk, I'd like to thank a number of people: Sarah Lurcock, Paul Rodhouse, Alison Neal and her colleagues Marie and Lynn of SGHT, Dr. Martin Collins for his introduction, and finally Pat Lurcock for operating the Zoom meeting. So that's very good. So this is the whaling from South Georgia. Now, wait a minute. I'm not getting it. I'm screen sharing, so how do I?
I'm seeing your screen, John. If you've got an arrow key that might move you to the next slide, that might work.
That's what I'm trying, but it's not working. But there's a at the top, there's another new share, but that wouldn't maybe help us. I can't get the pictures to move now with the last. It has to be like that, doesn't it?
Try clicking on the first picture and that might activate it.
Yes, thank you for that. So it looks like it. So anyway, in 1954, I had just finished my apprenticeship as an electrician, and it just coincided. I'd met an engineer who was at the whaling, and he'd said to me, "A good job for you, come to the whaling." So I went through to Edinburgh, I got a medical, and before I knew it, I was sent to Kingston Dock, just below the Kingston Bridge in Glasgow. I'm sure you all know that place. And I joined the Southern Opal and went away to, first place, it was Aruba. And so I'm taking pictures here and there, you know, and even the refinery in Aruba. And strangely enough, at the end of my career, I worked for British Petroleum. Anyway, the second time, remember I went twice, and the second time I went to a place called Carapito, and Carapito was in the off the Orinoco Basin. I think it was, I'm starting to forget the name of it. Anyway, this was the mission station, and I always remember coming off the boat and having to walk along this little place and looking down. This was the mission station, and there's tiny little crabs with big claws. I thought, well, I don't want to fall in there. And anyway, this is a place where you can get oil and look at the firefighting equipment. You would shudder nowadays, wouldn't you, if that was a place for loading crude oil. Anyway, after we got our oil, we went down and we were waiting for the tide in the Orinoco Basin, and somebody decided to throw a bit of meat over the side, and before we knew it, they got a shark. And this is just sunset on the Orinoco. So we're leaving there, and this would be the first view of South Georgia. I mean, I've arranged the pictures in such a way, you know, maybe that wasn't the first time I saw it, but that was a nice picture. Now, Leith Harbour in winter, you can tell by the number of catchers that the factory ships are still, you know, maybe 2 months away. And this was a nice picture that's been on an awful lot of the books that have been made about South Georgia. Leith Harbour in summer, well, the catchers are still here, but they'll disappear shortly. And this is the manager's house in Leith Harbour. This is the manager's house here. That was his greenhouse. This was the piggery. And that big place there was the steward's store. And the accommodation that I lived in was over here. Anyway, Southern Garden, you know, it was really strange. I was calling that a different name, and it was our dear friend Bob Burton that pointed out that it wasn't the opal, it was the garden, Southern Garden. Southern Joker. Now, she was one that I actually eventually managed to get a trip out on. So the whale catcher Colin Free. Now you'll notice the very high bow, you know, and this would probably be a catcher that had been bought from an ex-corvette. And I know that Salveson bought quite a few as well. So this is on the right of the picture. That was the manager's, and the radio room was at the top, and this was the hospital. Harpoon gun and foregoers, Southern Guider. Now, even in 1954, these are nylon that are spliced to 4-inch manila. That would be the 4-inch manila there. Now you can see how that's attached to the harpoon, and these things cost 400 pounds in 1950, you know, in the 1950s, quite expensive. Now, during the time I was there, the Duke of Edinburgh turned up, and so everyone and his auntie were coming to see Prince Philip. There you'll see the Royal Yacht Britannia, and to the left of the picture, that was the Protector. And this is Prince Philip meeting the doctors. And this was instrumental. This was my first picture on a stamp, Prince Philip meeting the doctors. And that was very nice to think. I've got a picture on it. Now, it's not a British stamp, it's a stamp of the government of South Georgia and the South Shetland Islands. Hospital operating theatre. I'm glad to see I managed to keep out of there. And that was the surgery. So I was very lucky in that respect. The Protector, you can easily see that she'd been some kind of a cable layer of some sort. And that was our protection in the South, the British government protection in the South Atlantic in the 50s. Now the John Biscoe, and this is where I'd like to share a picture. Now, how can I do this? Yes, if I hold it up here. This is a picture that Paul Rodhouse sent me, and I just thought it just, I think he told me that he thinks that was maybe the first trip that the John Biscoe did. Anyway, he sent me that painting and it's lovely. And here she is unloading stores. And I mean, it was great because we didn't get a lot of mail. Rounded iceberg. And I used to call that Mutton Island in the back because it had been, but I've now found out it's Green Island it's called. But I think they did try to have sheep there, but I don't think that was successful. The Magadan was a Danish exploration ship, and she made the film Hell Below Zero with Alan Ladd. But Alan Ladd was never down there. It was all done in a tank in Pinewood, his scenes. Foster seaplane, the bow of a Norwegian tanker, and whale catchers at anchor in Jericho. This part on the right was called Jericho, and originally the whaling station had been there, but then there was some kind of an avalanche, and they decided to move the whaling station further away. Southern Satellite and the Southern Garden. Now, Leith from Coronda Peak. Now, you can definitely see this is the summertime because there's only the Southern Opal on the right at the bottom and two spare whale catchers in Jericho. You can see over here, that's the dam. Sadly, that was the dead center of South Georgia, that was Leith Harbours anyway. And this would be the guana shed with the steam rising. But all this was the plant here. A harvester, and this would be at the end of the season, you see, because she's come alongside, and while there's only maybe 5 days it would be here, they've got the crew over the side and they're painting her so that she's nice and clean for going back to the UK. And in the background there is the Venturer. There she is, there's the Southern Venturer. And I was lucky enough to be a season on both of these ships. This is always the one that reminds me the most about Leith Harbour. All the stuff was just dumped, you know, on the, not a very pleasant place to look at, but in the background you can see the glacier which fed the dam. This is a tank farm in Leith Harbour, and during the period I was there, we got a new cinema, which was nice because previously the cinema was somewhere in here, and this was a very nice cinema. Pump house. Now you'll see there's different coloured pipelines, and the reason for these pipelines, different colours, was sperm whale oil had to be kept separate from blue whale, fin whale and sei whale oil because they couldn't be mixed. There's the dam, and there's even the football pitch out here. Green Island, you see it? As I said, I knew what I called it was Mutton Island. That's what they called it when I was there. Now, the only way you could get from Leith Harbour to Stromness was to use this water bus. I mean, it would have been quite a long walk over. You could have walked it, I suppose, but we had to go back and forward quite a lot. And here, you won't see it so clearly, but there are dry docks here. There, one dry dock, there's the other. And that's a catcher in dry dock. And, you know, the tail end gang, it was a horrible job they had to do. They would be doing repairs to the rudder and the propellers. And then the rest of them would scrape all the paint off the hull, and then it would be painted again. Rather nice colour of red reflected there. That's another catcher in dry dock. Just a different time because we went back and forward reasonably often. Now, this was a seal bull amongst the spare propellers. he's not too happy about me being there probably, and the reason for these big poles and the numbers, if they wanted, they would know if they wanted this propeller here, there would be a number up here that would tell them where to dig down to get it. Now, this was a Russian catcher that arrived, and it was much bigger than our vessels. And you can tell that even with it fully up out of the water, you still had to walk on the water. But the reason this catcher came in, it lost its propeller because the engineer didn't stop the engine quick enough. And you'll see what happened in a minute. Anyway, it was quite amazing for me to be with my little Agfa Silette that I had at that time and up on the dry dock and taking a picture of and the Russian crewmen on board were shouting, "Azorki, Azorki," and I didn't know what that meant, but I did find out later, of course, it was a Russian camera. Now, I'll just let you see, there was the propeller. And there's just a little story about that. The Russians had a choice. They could come to us, or they could go up to South America, or they could have gone to South Africa, to Cape Town. But Salveson said to them, look, if you want us to do it, you will deposit £10,000 into the Bank of England, because they knew that if they put the propeller on first, they would never have seen the money. So duly, the Russians paid, and it was sorted. Now, this is the way we used to get from interstation transport when we went round to Great Viken. And this is my picture of the Northern Skuld Glacier. And I know it doesn't look like anything like that now. You've got to remember, it's closing on for about 70 years since I took this picture. Maybe 68. Anyway, climbing to the ski jump and the ski jumper. So, it's the best I could do. Anyway, this is where the landing area was. And I did not try, I was too scared to try the ski jumping, but I did do the cross-country runs. And I wasn't last, but I wasn't first, obviously. I'm somewhere in the middle. But I was quite pleased. Winter scene in Great Viken. Obviously, nothing running now. But this was Great Viken with Discovery Point in the foreground, and I'm sure there's quite a lot of people know this area very well. It's quite a lot different now. But that was, so I tried to take a picture, no, not yet. This is the church and the interior. And of course, I did this for my dad because he was a Church of Scotland minister. And Shackleton's grave, and Shackleton's memorial at Hope Point. Now, the trip on the Southern Joker, I was keen to get a trip out, and my boss at Leith Harbour at that time was a Dundee electrical engineer called Duncan Dewar. And I kept nipping at his ear. And he got fed up asking me one day. He said, okay, then you can go. So that was great. And I mean, it was quite an amazing thing for me to see these guys. And this was the helmsman. And I didn't know what I was looking for, but he would say, blast. And, he'd point out where you could see a whale blowing. The other thing you had to be careful of was these growlers. It's all right in a nice day like this, but what about when it's a day like that, or at night time? Very, very difficult for people to, anyway, The walkway on the right allows the gunner access from the bridge. So, you know, it's not very nice wandering down there, but the gunner would be down there ready to operate. Whales ahead. And there's whale fast. And here, the killer harpoon would be fired there. And you see, these were Kodachromes I took. And I had to wait 18 months to see this. But what happens is the harpoon had not got into a vital part of the whale and it had gone through to this side. So they had to play the whale until they got it close enough. And this would be the killer harpoon, not on a rope. It would just go in. I mean, I'm not making any apologies for, it wasn't a terrible thing that we were doing, but we thought at the time that we were doing some good for the country. Then the whales were flagged. You had to have a flag, that would be the catcher. And then they had a number there, and I think there was a radio beacon so that they could go back and collect it. And the view looking aft, here you would see these are the poles that they stuck into the whale, because they had to pump them up with air, because once the whale was alongside, it would have sunk and it wouldn't have, maybe down for about 3 weeks, and then it would come up. So they had to pump air into them to keep them afloat. Now, this whale has been brought alongside the catcher, and you'll notice that any old bits of rope, the catcher crews would wrap the chains, and there would be 1, 2, 3 chains. It was very important they didn't lose the tail, because without the tail, the whale would just be lost. And it was very important when the whale was being pulled up onto a factory ship. But anyway, these were the flag. This was then bringing them. And this winch in the foreground, that the job of the chief engineer, he had to play the whale until they brought it alongside, because if the whale wasn't badly injured, they would be running alongside, you see, and they had to play it and pull the rope in until they got it close enough for the killer harpoon. Then they would bring the whales alongside, and that's just inside Leith Harbour. And at the top of, you can't just see it, but just where that's where the whales would be dropped off. And then this guy here, the boatman, and I know it was his son, I remember that. Anyway, they would bring the whale alongside to be pulled up onto the plan. Now, when the men went away for their lunch, obviously the birds were having a great time feeding, and so, but I'm sure we could afford that. Now, this was the only blue whale I saw in the time that I was at Leith Harbour, but I did see a giant blue whale when I was on the Harvester, and you could have hidden probably 3 double-deckers behind it. And you see how these guys are up there with they've got special plan boots, and they can climb up here. And what they're doing is they're starting to flange. They put a wire rope and a toggle here, and then they start towing it. This guy here is telling the crane driver to pull. And here you go, removing the blubber. Now, this must have been a very good season for us at Leith Harbour, because look at the number of I can't remember, but if you count the jaw bones, there's certainly a great number of them. And the license at Leith Harbour in the 50s was for total utilisation of the whale. They weren't allowed to chuck stuff away at all. And these bones, yes, these were fins, but this is a sperm whale. Don't ask me what the foreground is, but it's poor whale's guts, I suppose. Anyway, you'll notice that the jaw, the lower jaw, with the teeth, and close up of the head, you'd see the teeth, and they would slot into these little bits up here. And the whale, in my day, they knew that they went right down to the sea bottom, because if an octopus would try and block their airway, the whale knew what to do. It just went down and battered its head and killed the nasty creature. And there's, I think there's, yeah, this, if you look at the size of that, the whale teeth probably would be, that's just the tip of it. And obviously they were sought after not only by Salvesen, but by the men. And we used to, we were very lucky because the electricians had loads of bakelite. So if we said, any chance of getting a few whale teeth, they say, yep, but we want in return some bakelite, because they were making little penguins, and I did some myself. I might even be able to let you see them later on. I've got them in the house. Anyway, that was the sperm whale jaw. And this was a sei whale. And you knew the difference because they were light on the underbelly, and these guys are busily flensing them. Now, removing the jawbone, that really romping one. I mean, only not even much past 8, but never mind, we'll just keep going. And this is flensing. Now, the Norwegians, if you had a beard, I didn't know at the time, but they called you barder face. But this was the filter that the blues, the Finns, and the Sais used to filter the water so that they could swallow the krill. And this is a close-up of the jaw, and you can see how the filter, quite an amazing thing. Now the men are away to lunch again, and so the birds are having their, I think we could afford to give the birds a bit of feeding sometime. And the strips of blubber, they would be cut into strips and then fed, where's my pointer? Yeah, here. This area here, they would be chopped and put down into these bits. And it would go up into a Hartmann plant where, you know, everything that needed processed was done there. And of course, the tragedy of the whaling was, how did the capture captains know if a whale was pregnant? There was no way of knowing. But I do know, because we did have you know, Royal Navy, ex-Royal Navy people who policed the whaling business. And if they, for instance, if a catcher captain killed a milk-filled whale, you know, where they would know because there would be a baby running alongside, then the catcher captain wouldn't get paid. But that was the tragedy of the whaling, obviously. And I'm always sorry that I never took, this is a harpoon that's come out of a whale, but I've seen a harpoon bent at right angles. And that's why the blacksmiths we used to think, why do blacksmiths get more money than electricians and you know, all the other trades? But they were first on the scene before electricians and stuff, so they were a different grade from us, specialist people. They straightened the harpoons. Then the bone saw loft, the bones would be dragged up to this bone saw loft, and then it would be steam saw. This guy's steadying the thing and they're chopping it up, you see. And down here, where this, we would take the cover off that and the bones would be put down there. Here's another, this would be the vertebrae. You can see the size of it. And obviously, always they tried to pull things with winches. They were all steam winches there. And of course, the blood would just run into sea from the plan. And the Cape pigeons would be having a nice feed. Whale ribs. This guy would be cutting these, and then as they cut it, the bits dropped into here, and that would be a rotating thing that would chop them up. So they would be processed. Everything was processed. And this is processing meat in the Hartman plant. This guy's just opening a cover and they'll be chucking stuff down there. Now the laboratory was a very important thing. In fact, I remember wiring this place up at one point, but I do remember that the chemist was a very important person at the whaling. And he was, well, he wasn't universally hated, but he was certainly hated by the tank gang, because if one of the vessels came down with crude oil, then they had to clean the tanks before they could put whale oil in. And they used a thing called the Butterworth. It was hot salt water they used, and they lowered it down into the tank. And as they were doing that, it was battering the sides of the tank. And after that, the tank gang had to go in and they had to make sure that it was spotless. And if it wasn't spotless, the chemist said to them, do it all again. So he, as I say, he wasn't very popular, but that was his job. Now, this was the season that you saw all these whales on the plan deck, and so much stuff was still waiting to be processed. I think it took about 6 weeks after the season ended before all the bones were turned into bone meal. Now, bones overflowing and awaiting processing. And they're even out here, you know, they're not even, there were so many of them, it took them quite a while. Now, as an electrician, I was one of these lucky people that usually worked weekends as well, but occasionally the boss would say, right, come on, you guys, have a day off. So I crossed Caronda Peak one day. I didn't bother walking on that small loch. I could tell it wasn't too clever. So this is approaching Hercules Bay. And Hercules Bay was there's a catcher going out. And we're approaching the rookery. General view of the penguin rookery. And one of the things you knew, if you went too close to these guys, they just turned on you and fired a nasty smelling liquid from the rear ends, obviously. There's the Gentoo with eggs. With a chick, obviously had been a different day when the chicks were a bit further on. And Gentoo eggs. And then I remember going with this guy, and he was very good. He could see things. So he put it on his hand so that I could get a picture like that. And this was the only time I saw a chin-strap penguin at Leith Harbour. So that was, and this was a macaroni penguin. A macaroni penguin with an egg, and it's unbelievable. There's thousands of these, they're a bit further away from Leith Harbour. Just hundreds of them. Now the Arctic tern egg, now I would never have spotted it, but the guy that was with me, he did, and he even put the chick on his hand so I could get a picture. Skua, and you know, if you got too near their nests, they were adept at dive bombing you. But I did manage to get the pictures, not maybe too great. Seagull chick, Cape pigeon. But this was one of my favourite birds, the sooty albatross. And you know, I thought it was such a beautiful bird. And I actually managed to get a chick egg and a sooty albatross chick. And you can tell I was so keen on the, there's another one of a sooty albatross. And another time I was amazed, the guy just lifted the albatross off the nest, took a picture and put it back down again. The bull elephant seal, and he's the boss of the, he's just defeated this fellow. And so, of course, the winner takes all. And these are all the ladies with their pups. And this was one I just maybe got a little bit too close, and the angry female was letting me know. But look at the beautiful the young seals after a few weeks. And, you know, it was just, you couldn't believe anybody could harm a beautiful animal like that. This was a sunbathing pup. And I think my next picture, yes. Now, the reason I put this in, and you'll notice the picture was taken by Adam Scott in 2014. Now, Adam Scott, he was one of the crew that did the film Britain's Whale Hunters. And I remember our late friend, Sir Gerald Elliott, saying he was so angry, he should have said the Whale Hunters. It shouldn't have been called Britain's Whale Hunters. Okay, it was British money, but half the crews were Norwegian and the rest of us were Brits. But I thought this was taken on an iPhone, and I couldn't believe it. So I took this to, I made a print, no, I asked Adam could I get a file, and he sent the file up. And I made a print of it, and I took it in to let Alison Neal see it. And Sarah Lurcock was there that day, and she said, "John, could you do a limited edition of 100? And I'm sort of thinking to myself, yes, of course I could. But Alison said, "Now, John, don't be silly." I said, "No, I've got a better idea." So I made another print and sent it to Sir Gerald Elliott, and he sent me a substantial sum of money to pay for. I had to use A3 plus, and I was able to cut them in half. So I was getting 2 prints out of each sheet. But of course, it was an expensive business, and they were all mounted as well. Anyway, that is me coming to the end of my presentation. So shall I stop the share?
Thank you very much, John. That was fantastic.
Well, I'm sure I've probably, anyway, I'm delighted to see that there's nearly 400 people here.
No, that's been wonderful, John, and some comments coming in the chat there. I mean, it's fabulous that you took such good photographs at that time to give us all a flavour of what South Georgia was like in the whaling era. Because, I can't speak for everybody, but many of us here have been to South Georgia, but only seen it in modern times. Well, there's a few questions come through on the chat that I will try to field. One of them I spotted was a question about fur seals. And did you see many fur seals around in Leith when you were there in the 1950s?
No, I did not. But when I went back in 2009, there were quite a lot of them. And I was told, don't go too close to these guys. They've got a great turn of speed. But I've got pictures when I went back in 2009. And what I should say about the transparencies, they were all colour slides, obviously. And it was a friend of mine, I'll just mention his name, David Gold. He was the one that did the picture. It was actually called the Old Geezer, but now, of course, I'm the Ancient Geezer. But anyway, he said to me, you must get these slides digitized, and it was he that told me what to get, and that's why I got them all changed.
No, that's brilliant, John.
Sorry.
There's a question here come through from somebody else called Martin, but not from me. But they were asking what percentage of whales were processed on land versus those on board during your time down there?
Oh, no, that would be maybe a bit difficult for me to answer. I know that, it was small-time business in Leith Harbour compared to the factory ships. But I know that the year that I went to the Harvester, and we had a great season, a really big season. But the following year when I was on the Venture, it was an absolute disaster. But that was coming to the end of I knew that everybody knew that the whales were declining. And so I'm so pleased to see when I went back in 2009, the whales have sort of recovered.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic to see the whales back around there. Now, there's a question from Charlotte Spears who was asking about there was seals taken, but while you were down there, were they still taking seals for oil at that time, John?
No, that was all before my time. I know it was done maybe in the 20s and the 30s maybe, but there was no sign of anything like that when I was there. The seals were left alone. They were just working with whales.
And you hinted during that talk, John, that you might be able to show us one of these penguins that was carved during your time.
Yeah, I could do that. Now, just give me a second.
Of course, John. Now, if anybody else has a question, I'm going through the chat looking for any questions, but if there's anybody with anything they'd really like to ask John, please use the controls and raise your hand, and I can do a few questions to John.
Right, I'm back. Now, how do I do this? Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, yes, we can see that, John.
Now, I didn't do the painting, but it was beautifully done. Now, these would be probably Shetland, some of the Shetland whalers that did that. It's really lovely. And the bit of the bakelite, I told you about the bakelite. The electricians were kings there. We controlled the bakelite. There's another one. Now that I know what I'm trying to do. Oh, wait a minute.
Move it back.
So this would be another one that was done by one of the painters, the artists from Shetland. And then there's another one. Well, no, these ones actually, I'm proud to say that I did these myself. Now, wait a minute, where am I? It's strange trying to get them in the right. I'm too close.
Oh, yes, we can see those, John.
So these were carved by myself. I was just using a hacksaw and cutting different bits and pieces, and then plenty of sandpaper. In fact, the little one in the middle was separate for a long time. And my wife said to me one day, why don't you put the three of them together? Oh, yes, and there's one other thing I could show you. Right, this is actually something that was done for me when I was on the Southern Harvester. This is a harpoon gun that was brass, and at the time, is that, bring it closer?
That's good, John, yeah.
Now, the story about this was that one of the engineers knew that I was not an alcohol drinker at that time. And he said, look, if you give me your tots, because when there was whaling operations, Salvesen, every 2 weeks, they got a tot of rum. So he got my rum and he said, I'll make you a harpoon gun, which he did, which was very good of him. In fact,
Now, John, can I I'm going to ask one more question from the, I'm going to give the floor to Jane to ask a question, but can you tell us a bit about the food? What was the food like, the whaling stations?
oh, right, yes, well, at one point, you know, bacalao, you know, dried salted cod.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was put in water to be, and I don't think it would be a favourite of mine or anything, but I've tasted bacalao since and it was quite nice. But the other thing was, the whale had to be shot and it had to be flensed within 5 hours of being killed, because otherwise the fatty acid in the blubber would affect the whale meat and make it unfit for human consumption. So we would see sometimes the butcher being up at the place getting a big lump of whale meat, which he hung up, and it was outside for about 3 weeks, not where the birds could get it, but this was to allow the oil to drain out of it. And then after that, and here's someone who's, well, the wrong side of 88, and I've had a few whale steaks in my time, and which I enjoyed. Penguin egg omelets were very nice, and we were very, very lucky because, for instance, one of the, I think it was the garden, came in and they flooded a tank, and it was a lot of food. Now there was tin food, you see, so all the tins were they're all soaked and all the labels had come off. So I thought one day they were just going to be dumped. In fact, they were dumped at the Goanna Pier. So I borrowed a big magnet from the radar room and I dropped the magnet on a rope and I was pulling these things up. And of course, you didn't know what they were, but we took a series and we discovered by the numbers, so which were the tin fruit. So we took the ones that were tin fruit and we put the other ones back. And of course, the other guys, they discovered what we were up to, but maybe by the time we were finished. The electricians did eat royally from time to time. We had a little, in our electrical workshop, which was above the power station, we had a 10-slice toaster, and we had a cooker and things like that. So we didn't do so bad. Now, is that anybody else?
Thank you, John. I'm going to let Jane ask a question now. Jane, you have a question for John?
Hello, thank you very much, Martin. Yeah, John, I hope you can hear me okay.
Yes,
Thank
I
you
can.
so much for such an interesting talk. I'm really fascinated because there's so much heavy equipment around, and the men with their crampons climbing up the whales and the huge blades and everything. Were there very many injuries to the men? And if so, what sort of things happened to them?
Well, you know, in my time that I was there, I don't recall a lot of people being seriously hurt. We had 2 doctors, but I do recall one of the gunners, he obviously had a bottle of alcohol with him, and he went on one of the boats, and they were obviously drinking, and when he was trying to come off one catcher to the other one, he fell between the boats, and the boats were swaying back and forward, and he was crushed. I have never seen such a big coffin that man had. You know, that was really very sad. And, you know, but no, I don't recall a lot of people. Oh, well, wait a minute, that's wrong. I do recall during the winter, one of the winters, the catcher men that stayed over to do work. You know, you got your wages plus 75%. So it was 1 3/4 wages. And then, of course, if you got overtime as well. But this guy, they were painting down in the forward accommodation, and they were smoking, of course, and they shouldn't have been doing that. So this guy, this tin of paint caught fire, and the guy, instead of them getting out, he tried to take the tin on his shoulder and to get out. So he got halfway up, and then he was burnt enough that the tin fell back. So there was 2 guys that were quite badly burnt, but they did survive. And I do recall at one point, we were very friendly with the man who was, his name was Maurice Gregoire. He was a Frenchman, I think, and he had he was in charge of the big place where they stored, you know, meat and stuff like that. And we had got some chickens from him, and we were dining royally in our workshop. And I remember going to visit these guys, and they said, imagine some rotten so-and-sos have eaten all the chickens out of the fridge. And we said, oh, that's terrible, and rushed off as quickly as we could. But otherwise, no, I don't recall any serious injuries on the factory ships. But that's a different story.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, John. And thanks for the question, Jane. And John Dickens, you have a question for John.
Hi, John. Thank you very much for that talk. That was absolutely fantastic. Your photos are just amazing. I was just wondering, how many rolls of film would you take down for a season? Because obviously nowadays it's so easy to just click and take as many photos as you want. But back then you'd have to.
Maybe about 10 rolls. That would be, you know, it was expensive stuff, Kodachrome. But I'm glad that I took 200 ASA Kodachrome, because that was where it helped a lot. But no, I don't think, I know that it sometimes ran out, and I did have some Ferrania color at one point, because the colors are slightly different, but at least I could see what I'd taken when I was using Ferrania color, because I did it, processed it on the island.
Great, thanks very much, John. So there was a darkroom at Leith, was there?
John, did you use a dark room at Leith?
Oh yes, sorry, yes we did. We had a wee dark room. There was a gentleman there, one of the radar engineers, Jeff Smethurst. None of you will know his name, but he was a lovely guy, and we were buddies, you know. And the picture on the, you know, the ones that illustrate this talk, there's a picture of me as a 27-year-old, and that would be taken by my friend Jeff. But we had a little workshop, and I had a little folding enlarger, so I was able to make some black and white prints. But I couldn't do anything with the colour slides.
Thank you. And Bill, a question from Bill Block.
John, wonderful talk indeed. Just wanted to ask, did you have any impression of the Husvik whaling station during your visits to South Georgia?
Sorry, you repeat the question, please?
Yeah, John, did you have any visits to Husvik whaling station during your tour of duty, and what were your impressions of Husvik?
Well, you know, I never was able to visit Husvik, but I did visit it in 2009, and it was a lovely place. I think it must have probably had the best area for a whaling station, Husvik. But, you know, the pictures that I took then, of course, it was just a bit of a ruin, but it was a beautiful place, I remember. And it was going back to South Georgia in 2009. It truly was, to me, a trip of a lifetime. I never ever dreamt that I'd get back there. So, you know, it's definitely a nice place, but I never visited it in the 50s.
Thank you.
And John, there's lots of questions in the chat and lots of sort of compliments for the talk. I'm just going to pick on the last couple unless anybody else really. There's a question actually about what you thought of the smell of the whaling station when you first arrived there in 1954.
Well, that's a good question. Yes, well, I can remember coming on ashore at first, and I saw this. It looked like a coaling pier, where coal would be sliding down, because remember, before the oil, the places would be run, there would be a lot of coal used for the boilers. Anyway, under this place, there was a little door. And when I went inside this little door, it was a place with seating on 3 sides. And there was holes at regular intervals all around. And I'm thinking, crikey, is this the toilets? And so when I got up to my cabin, I was pleased to see that we had proper toilets. But anyway, the other thing was the smell. I remember it was, when it was cooking, it wasn't a bad smell. But I remember one of the crew saying to me, look, if you don't smell that smell, you're not making any money, because we got bonus on the amount of whales that were processed. So yes, that was, I can't think of, I'm running out.
No, that's fine. And I've got one more hand up, and it's Wendy. Oh, it doesn't look like Wendy, but we've anyway. You're muted still there.
John, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. My name is David Rarity. My father was down, he had 10 seasons down in South Georgia as company secretary. And I was just wondering, I've got a photograph of my father with Duncan Carse in one of his areas. And did the members of the actual workforce, did they have holidays? I mean, did they go to like South America for a fortnight or anything like that?
No, there was nothing like that. We were down there for the duration. What I did discover, and I didn't know, that Salvesen always employed some people from the Falklands. And I found a lot out when I went on that trip, when I went back, and I met some of the Salvesen employees. One of them was, he was Rex Hunt, was that his name? The governor at the time of the Falkland War?
Yeah, yeah.
He was his chauffeur. So that was very interesting. So I actually managed to join him into the south. There's a Salvas Next Whaler Club in Edinburgh. It's on its last legs now, really, because you can imagine I'm not the oldest. There's somebody that's still a member who's 104, but the active ones that come, there's one who's 92, I think. Then there's 91, and then I think I might be next to 88. I'll be 89 on my birthday, so it's getting on a bit. But one thing I'd like to say quickly is I did notice my brother Peter and his wife, so I did see them. So I'm pleased that I sent them a link. I was looking to see if my brother Robert in Canada, but I don't know if he has joined. But anyway, it was lovely. I enjoyed it very much, and I'm really hoping that you did enjoy my talk.
Thank you, John. And I'll give one last question. I've got a hand up there from Gwyneth and Anthony. Are you?
Yeah, I just want to say, as a keen photographer, I'm really impressed with the quality of your photographs. And I wonder if you continued to be a photographer and produce such good quality photos.
Well, yes, I did. I mean, to be fair, I mentioned an Agfa Select, but the thing about South Georgia was the Falkland Island Company were always sending little slips down, and I bought a camera called a Voigtlander Prominent, which wasn't an SLR, but it had a fantastic lens. I didn't know how good it was when I had it, really, but it took great pictures. And I went on to take pictures, and yes, I went from being I started working for BP. I came back to Dundee and I was working as a maintenance electrician. And then I saw these jobs for BP. That's where the BEM came from, by the way. The services to the oil industry. And I suppose you could say my career was from whale oil to crude oil.
Great. Well, thank you very much, John. And I think someone shared their screen there. Bob Wallace, I think you've inadvertently shared your screen with everybody. That's better. And well, anyway,
no.
Thank you. Really, a big sort of virtual round of applause, I'm sure, from everybody for that talk. So it really was fantastic. And you have a read of the chat when you get a chance in a second, because lots of other very positive feedback. So I think I'll start to draw things to a close, but I will just like to finish with one point, which is that the next South Georgia Association online event will be marking the 40th anniversary of the end of the Argentine occupation of South Georgia in 1982. So it'll be a talk about then and now. So recollections of life at King Edward Point by people who were there at the time of the invasion in 1982, when the military garrison was replaced by the Applied Fisheries Research Laboratory in 2001, and during the latest summer season, 2021 to 2022. So Bob Headland, Pat Lurcock and Jamie Coleman will present their memories of past recollections of recent events illustrated by contemporary photographs. So that's going to be the 22nd of April, 2022, 7:30. But keep an eye on the SGA website and other social media for more information about that. But yeah, that was really, really good. I really enjoyed that, John. And just one final thing, actually, I noticed in the chat that some of your photographs had been sold on the CD to raise some money for the rat eradication. And I think there probably will be people out there who would still love to get hold of some of your photographs. So I would wonder if they are still available to get copies of them from the SGHT or otherwise. Sure.
Yes, well, in fact, I made an extra 10 copies I haven't seen Alison and her friends, but they've definitely got them, and they cost £10 for the CD, and all the money goes to the South Georgia Heritage Trust. But I'm asking them, it would be good if we could actually get it on a memory stick would be better. So I'm still waiting to talk to Alison about that, but I don't know how expensive it would be to get. But I've got CDs still, and certainly I made 10 today, and I think there might be 20 or so the South Georgia Heritage Trust will have. So yes, you can certainly buy them if you wish.
Isn't it amazing?
Actually, Alison was here for the talk this evening, so I'm sure. Yeah, she's just put a link in the chat, sghtonline.gs. So she's been very, very quick off the mark there. So John, photographs are available. So yeah, please go to the SGHT website. Everybody's happy. I think it's been a wonderful evening, and great to see you again, John. And thank you very much.